What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim, and we are continuing in our series in terms of the state of each Big Ten program. You guys know I'm a huge Ohio State fan, and of course, I'm going to bring on my fellow Buckeye, Eric Boggs of the OHIO Podcast. Eric, thanks for joining us. How you doing today?
Thanks for having us, Zach. Doing great. It's the off season, so optimistic, I guess, is the word I would use right now, and with a slice of confidence mixed in with that. So, doing good. Appreciate you having me back on. Wasn't sure if you were going to do that or not after I dropped all of the weird tinfoil hat wearing theories on your doorstep last time, but I promise I'll be a little bit more logical this time. How about that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think I like the tinfoil hat wearingness that you bring. But you can be logical. For those of you who are listening on Spotify, it does say under Eric's like his subheading, "Will wear tinfoil hat for food." If I could feed you, I would. So we'll talk some Ohio food. Um, in case you're wondering how you can listen to the Big Ten Football Talk podcast, make sure to like, follow, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, YouTube. There is a huge jump in subscribes this past week and likes. So definitely watch us on YouTube. And Eric, where can we find you guys?
The easiest place is just look us up on our website, theohiopodcast.com. There you can find the links to everything we do, social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc. YouTube seems to be our fastest growing medium at this time, which is just look us up on the Ohio Podcast at YouTube. So yeah, we're everywhere. Wherever you just want to find us, you can find us. Just got to type in the Ohio Podcast, you'll find us.
Very cool. And before we get to Ohio State, you were also a bit of the mastermind of this new College Huddle network or thing.
Community.
Community.
Yeah, yeah,
Speak a little bit more to
yeah.
that before we dive into Ohio State.
I became very jaded toward the sense of creating content that others would take advantage of. And so I decided through communicating with JR, who I know you know very well, working with him on his show over at the College Huddle on the Big Ten Huddle show, and some friends from the Purdue podcast, that we could create a community where the quote unquote network was designed to help each individual podcast grow their own brand
Mhm.
instead of the brand, each individual podcast growing a network's brand. And so it's a little bit reverse psychology in that regards. And so that's why I like to use the word community, because I really do feel like it is a community. And I can give one quick example, Zach, on why this works. So over at the Missouri podcast, Woodswater, Mizzou, Skeeter, who's the host over there, had a bad accident at work. He's in the hospital. He's asking everybody for prayers. He's getting part of his toe and foot toes, lost three toes and part of his foot amputated.
Mm.
And the community's coming together. We raised money for him and for his family. And then a rival podcast from Arkansas, I think it's Hogs on the Hill, uh, went and visited him in person at the hospital.
Wow.
Gave him, these are things that networks typically don't do, right? So that's
Mhm.
why I say this is a community of independent, and it's really awesome to see everybody kind of working together and everybody working hard to grow each other's brands, but also their own. I expect big things in the fall. I do know there are some big companies, Zach, some big media companies. They know who we are and they're watching us
Hmm.
because what we're doing is incredibly unique, where you have a bunch of independent content creators and podcasters getting together and saying we can do more together than by ourselves, and it's working.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lot of proof in the pudding, just in the fact that we've collaborated, and JR and we've all collaborated, and we've seen the listenership grow on all of our platforms. But it's certainly not competition. Like, we really love working together, and so
Right.
um,
And we purposely tried to make it to where there's one pod representing each school.
mhm,
Now we might
yeah,
have more in the future because some pods only are sports specific.
yes, yeah,
And if that's the case, then we'll be like, okay, well then we'll find one that's a sport specific for that other sport. Talking football and basketball, right? So we might have a Ohio State football podcast, but we might bring on an Ohio State basketball podcast as well. But they're not going to be competing with each other in regards of trying to get listeners or eyeballs to their videos and to their podcasts because they're looking at different people, right? So, but that's been the big thing is like we don't want to step on anybody's toes, but at the same time, we can do more together, right, than
yep.
trying to do it all by ourselves.
For sure, for sure. Well, and it's fun being part of this community. So I'm
Yeah,
excited now that my busy season is from September to May, or August, late August to May, and now that it's May, I'm like, oh, I have more time to play and more time to just be involved in the community. So
cool.
excited to be a part of this thing with you guys. Let's shift gears. Let's talk Ohio State. Um, I think if you polled 120 or 125 programs out of the 134 FBS programs, they would be dying to be Ohio State. And yet, Ohio State fans, me included, have questioned, is Ryan Day the guy? And the past 3 years have been miserable. Can you give, particularly Big Ten fans who are not Ohio State fans and probably not Michigan fans either, can you give perspective for the rest of the Big Ten why the past 3 years have been such a disappointment?
Yes, and I think Michigan fans will understand this absolutely
Mhm.
because they lived it for 2 decades.
Right.
It doesn't matter how good you are if you're not good on that last Saturday in the month of November, then it doesn't matter how good you are. The only thing that can erase that feeling of losing to that rival would be winning a national championship. But even then, even if you won it, you'd still have to put up with, well, you didn't win that game. The game means everything in the sense that it's hard to boil down success to one thing, but it really does in this rivalry. And this might change over time slightly now that the Big Ten is bigger, and you might win that game, and neither team plays for a Big Ten championship.
Mm.
But typically, historically, the winner of that game wins the Big Ten. And not always, but most of the time, right? That's probably going to change a little bit, but for the most part, that's how it has been in the past. Now we enter this new era where you, you're after that game, there could be 5 additional games, but you
Right.
might play them two more of those games. Like it's crazy to think about that. But in a nutshell, it boils down to that one game. And despite all the successes that Ohio State has had on the field, in recruiting, off the field, in the classroom. A lot of people don't talk about that, but literally the graduation rate under Ryan Day and really started under Urban Meyer, believe it or not, and just the community service outside the classroom has
Mhm.
been phenomenal under these two guys.
So yeah, so everything seems good except for that one
Yes.
Saturday.
Yeah. Imagine how much things would have changed last year if you won that game.
Yep. And they were very close, right? Like, if Kyle
6 points,
McCord,
one drive, right? Yeah.
yeah,
So here's all right. We want to put tinfoil hat on. I'll put tinfoil hat on.
here we go. Let's go.
Let's make believe Ohio State loses that game to Notre Dame in South Bend.
Mm,
Let's say Ryan. Let's say Kyle McCord on that last drive does throw an interception, which he honestly should have. The throw to Emeka Egbuka is literally 1 inch off, and it gets batted down. Um, Marcus Freeman decides to play defense with 11 guys on the goal line.
right.
Like all of these things had to happen in order for Ohio State to win that game. Kyle McCord comes running off the field looking like the hero. We're all saying, calling him Kyle McCool. At that point, Zach, he won the job. There's nothing Ryan Day could have done at that point to
Mhm.
take that man off the field. Like, what are you going to do? He just won you a game winning drive that was magical. The whole fan base is behind this guy now, right?
Yep.
Except for a handful of Devin Brown supporters who were going to die on that hill.
Right.
And rightfully so. Now they look like they were probably right. Okay. Um, but let's say Kyle McCord doesn't win that game. Does that not give Ryan Day the opportunity to reassess the quarterback position at that moment, knowing he's got
Mm.
a bye week coming up, 2 weeks to prepare before they go into Big Ten play, and maybe he gives Devin Brown another fighting chance. If he does, Devin wins that starting position and starting job. And I know that there's going to be people who say, "But Eric, he's often injured." Yes, he got injured a couple times. I understand that, but this is a hypothetical, right? This is in another universe somewhere. He wins that starting job. He has the rest of Big Ten play to elevate himself and get ready. Is it possible, Zach, that Ohio State would have been better offensively by the end of the season with Brown at quarterback than Kyle McCord? And if so, Ohio State could have won that game. And if they did, how much different would things have been? So all of this stems from the fact that I blame Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame.
There we go. This is why have we lost 3 straight to Michigan? It's Marcus Freeman's fault.
Yes.
His betrayal of Ohio State in so many ways. Well, but and to your point, and I think the listeners know I was Team McCord. I liked Kyle. Um, I know not everybody did, but there was frustration those first 3 games before Notre Dame
Hmm.
because of how stagnant they were offensively, so that Devin Brown didn't get time.
Correct.
And that was, I think, part of the reason, to your point. If they lose to Notre Dame, now all of a sudden you have more games to reassess, which is what the fan base wanted in the beginning, because you had people in that quarterback room saying, this is, this is an open job.
Hmm.
And it was not an open job. It didn't feel like an open job. It felt like it was McCord's to lose because he had to play, because the offense stunk for the first couple games. And they
Yep.
finally, Western Kentucky, they got Devin Brown on the field for more than just a series or two. So that was, I think that I think there is a world where you're absolutely right that, similar to, I'm trying to think of this season, I think 2008, Beckman was the incumbent,
Oh gosh, yeah. That's
and
going way back.
yeah, but he's the incumbent, and he's just awful. And then Bowserman and Braxton Miller is probably another one where
Yep.
Bowserman is just, the there's the chart that goes around where it's like incomplete passes, and some
And
of the
it's
passes
it's in the stands.
in the stands.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. No, so you're absolutely right. So you asked the question, why is Ohio State fans seem to be so agitated? You add that as the last exclamation point, if you will, following 2 seasons of probably the best, greatest quarterback that you've ever had in Ohio State history, and CJ Stroud, that feels
yep,
wasted now.
yep,
And that's where the frustration's coming from.
yeah.
The
Well, and
roster,
yeah,
the roster's been good enough. You had
mhm,
Georgia on the ropes,
yep,
right? And that's despite losing to the team up north,
yeah.
who then turned around and lost to TCU because they couldn't steal their plays that day. I mean, there's
Yep,
just so many things that agitate you as a Buckeye fan the last couple years because you've been so close. It's like 11 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day, and you can smell the aroma from the kitchen, but you're not allowed to go in and taste it.
Mm,
That's
yep.
where that's the analogy, a good food analogy for you.
There you
That's
go.
what it feels like for Ohio State fans right now. We are so close, you can smell the aroma. We haven't got to taste it since Urban Meyer
Yep.
Urban Meyer early. It's been
10
10 years.
years. Yeah. Well, and that I think that leads to this question. It's absurd to think that a guy who's only lost 8 games in 5 years could be on the hot seat. But is Ryan Day firmly on the hot seat in your mind?
For a portion of the fan base, yes.
What about you personally?
Yes, he is for me personally. But it's not for what you think. Like, I love everything about Ryan Day as a man, as a
Mhm.
father, what he stands for. Um, I could I think he needs to improve how he answers questions to the media, but
Mhm.
we're kind of spoiled from Urban Meyer just flat out telling you the absolute truth, whether you like it or not. He's a little bit more of Jim Tressel, who I love too, by the way,
Mhm.
um, for just completely different reasons. But Ryan Day is so good, but at the same time, he's almost a machine about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing there's nothing that feels really like he feels like he's going to be very awesome from a distance. But there's only a certain few people that I think he allows into his inner circle where he lets the guard down and he's himself. A lot of players get that from him, but
Mhm.
fans and media and not so much, which is okay. I mean, that's his decision. That's his choice to be. Um, it's really hard to because I have this debate with Notre Dame people all the time about Ryan Day. They think we're nuts for saying Ryan Day's on the hot seat, given what they've been through, with
Right.
coaches and then Kelly and now Marcus Freeman. And I say, but they don't have that game on their schedule like we do. They've got USC,
Mhm.
but it's not the same. Like it's
Right.
close, but it's not the same. Um, so they don't understand the importance of your year as a human being
Yeah.
based around one 3.5 hour Saturday afternoon in November. So
Yeah.
is he on the hot seat for me? Yes, but is he on the hot seat from the people who matter? I don't think so. Like, I don't think Ross Bjork's going to come in and pull the trigger in 1 year.
Yeah, and it's different with Chris Holtmann, right? Which you going back to basketball because Chris
Yeah,
Holtmann, it was the same stuff year in and year out, and they weren't
right,
even making the NCAA tournament.
right. The
Whereas,
results weren't there.
yeah, whereas I think Ryan Day, he can lose to Michigan for a fourth straight year and still be in the playoff, and I would be shocked if they're not in the 12-team playoff,
Right.
which we'll talk about. Um,
I
but
just
yeah,
don't see I don't see Ross Bjork pulling the trigger. What I think happens if he loses again this year, first off, if he loses again this year, the fan base is going to be irate.
yeah,
Like I at that point, I think the pendulum shifts from the vocal minority to the vocal majority at that point. Again, unless he wins the national championship somehow.
yeah,
Because then the argument is how can you fire a guy who just won the national championship, right?
right,
But let's in this scenario that you bring up, he loses a fourth time. There's no Jim Harbaugh. You have a better roster again. There is
mhm,
no Connor Stallions, right? So not even to begin the season, like he's gone. Um, all of that is now in your favor. You got the game at home again. You lose this one again. That pendulum is shifting, and now I think Ross Bjork is going to hear it and feel it
yeah.
from the fan base for that whole next year. So, do I think he would get fired this year? I do not. But I think it would be the scarlet wave, if you will,
Yeah.
that would come down.
You mentioned, you know, maybe the saving grace for losing to Michigan a fourth straight year would be a national championship. I heard this question on the podcast network, Austin Ward and
Mhm.
Doug Lesmerises and those guys. Um, are Ohio State fans more concerned with beating Michigan or winning a national championship?
Both.
Yes.
The answer to
So,
that question is yes.
which one matters more in your mind?
Right now, beating Michigan, in my mind,
Yeah.
because you haven't done it for 3 years in a row, and it's something you get a chance to do every single year. You don't get a chance to win a national championship every single year. I mean, hypothetically, yes, you do. Okay, but that's
Mhm.
true for all 133 or however many teams there are now, right?
Right.
I mean, but the answer to your question is you, as an Ohio State fan, it is engraved. It is it's genetic. Like, you're born to hate that team.
Mhm.
And as much as we like to talk trash with the SEC, um, there's a chance you don't even play them this year, right?
Yeah.
But you're
Yep.
gonna play that team in November,
Yep.
unless they magically all get COVID again. But
Yeah.
but you see my point. Like,
Yep.
it's on the schedule. The countdown clock's already begun.
Yeah.
So to me, the way I look at it, and this is going to be a change of philosophy, and it's going to be hard for us old timers who have gray in our beards. You don't get to play for a national championship unless you beat that team. See
Right.
the difference in it. So that's going to be, that's going to be an interesting dynamic to add every single year moving forward.
Yeah. It's this is an anecdote with that, but I remember in 2022, I didn't even want to play Georgia because we lost. I was like, whatever, I don't really care. And then around by the time the game got to it, I'm like, I care. I want Ohio State to beat Georgia. I thought it was going to be a blowout. I thought Georgia was going to crush us. And when we got out 21-7, I was like, what? Where was this team in Columbus in
Oh yeah,
November?
exactly.
And but I remember feeling like I got up for it like probably a week before, and I was like, okay, I'm excited for this game, but it took a long time for me to be excited. Like
Hmm.
I was like, we don't deserve to be there. We
Well,
lost.
we went into that game with a fresh wound.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of feel like we were the knight in the Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail, right? Like, we got one arm, we're bleeding out, and it is merely a flesh wound. Where's the Bulldogs, right? I mean, like, but as fans, man, we were hurting,
Yeah.
and then as the game played out, we got the other arm whacked off too,
Right.
or I guess the leg, because the ball went wide left by about 500 yards. But
Yeah.
um,
Well, we lost,
yeah,
Stover was out and Harrison got knocked out and we had no running backs. Like it was
Xavier Johnson was
insane.
running the football from a he played wide receiver all year, and he's our running back in that game. Like, it was sad, but yet what infuriated me was the fact that Ryan Day was so aggressive as a play caller that day. And it was like, where was this
Yep.
a
Yep.
couple weeks ago? CJ Stroud running the ball on 3rd and long and gaining the first down, and it's like,
Yeah. What
seriously,
happened?
what happened? Where was this? So
Yeah.
that's what was difficult, I think, as a fan that day.
Yeah. So I think you've really encapsulated well kind of the state of the program the past few years, right? Like it's been really good, but that last Saturday in November, excuse me, has been awful.
Mhm.
And then you get to the end of 2023, the Cotton Bowl, which I think you convinced me that Ryan Day threw. Not really, but
Just
it,
about.
yeah, it felt like
Justin
it.
Justin Fry totally threw it.
Yeah, it was.
That's no joke. I mean that was a fireable offense.
Yeah,
I'm still upset at Justin Fry for what he did that offensive line that game. That
yeah,
was the worst offensive line play I have seen as an Ohio State fan ever.
yeah. It
Ever.
was it was. I think fireable is valid, and I'm surprised that he wasn't out the door. And yet that happened. You have all the transfers. The running backs coach Tony Alford decides to leave for their rival, and yet momentum feels really high,
Mhm.
right? Like they not only lose a coach and they fired a couple coaches, but they have all these transfers. Although, granted, none of them really are starters. Like, where is, and I think some people know the answers, but where is this momentum and this hype coming from with the way that Ohio State has performed the past 3 years?
How many fans of the SEC listen to this podcast, do you think?
I think some. I mean,
Okay.
certainly it's Big Ten heavy.
You're probably going to lose them when I answer this question.
Uh oh.
But I think your Big 10 fans who aren't Ohio State fans are either A, going to totally agree with me on this and are going to get excited, or are going to be really upset that they aren't doing what Ohio State's doing.
Hmm.
The last 25 years, the SEC has pretty much dominated college football.
Hmm.
It has been the dirtiest secret that everybody seems to know that the SEC has been paying players for a long time,
Hmm.
specifically in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and in Athens, Georgia. I mean, every now and then another SEC program will jump up, LSU, Florida, you name it. Um, but specifically, those two have been in a bidding war with each other for a solid decade and a half now. But it's really gone on longer before that. The famous "get your bag" comes from Bagman that literally existed in the SEC.
Hmm.
But the SEC, until Texas A&M decided they were going to become a big boy and pay for everybody, and that made Nick Saban upset. Until that happened, it was all hush hush under the table, all gee golly shucks, the old SEC paying for players, right?
Hmm.
Now it's not up below the table anymore. It's all above the table. It's all legal through NIL. Your northern schools have been playing by the rules for the most part because they haven't had the corporate protection from a conference level, looking at the athletic directors, to keep all of that in house.
Hmm.
And so now that NIL is legal, Ohio State is just doing what Georgia and Alabama have been doing for years. We're paying players. Um, to a lesser degree, you are seeing it as some of the other schools here in the North. I think Notre Dame has a really good NIL but it's a little different. They're not really going after recruits with it. They're going more transfer portal and then keeping guys that they have in house. Michigan has got an NIL, although there was some concern about that NIL having some cracks in their foundation recently.
Hmm.
But they do have an NIL that has been, if you talk to any of the former players, that they got paid a little bit, you know. Um, it's there. You can use it. It's legal. There's nothing the NCAA can do about you using NIL to pay for A, recruits, B, transfer players, C, maintaining your roster. And those are
Hmm.
the three things a coach has to do now when it comes to roster building is you have to maintain your roster. You have to intelligently get players from the portal who are going to boost your roster, and you have to maintain or build your roster for future years through recruiting. And if you have NIL that can do all three of those things, it gives you a huge advantage in college football now. So, Ohio State's NIL collective is really who Ryan Day needs to be thanking for all of this. Ryan Day's he's a great guy, and I think he's a really good recruiter. But let's be honest, Zach. Without the 13 million plus that was spent in NIL this year in recruiting, transfer portal, and maintaining the roster, we aren't feeling this way right now. So to answer your question, why do fans feel this way? It's because we've hit home runs in all three of those things: recruiting, transfer portal, maintaining roster. And so that momentum is tremendous right now, but needs to be credited to the fact that Ohio State's NIL really stepped to the plate. Really stepped to the plate. If you remember signing day, uh,
Mhm.
two of our five-star guys were being courted by Florida State and Miami, and those guys didn't call the coaches. Those guys called the NIL collectives. And
Mm.
said Florida State offered me, Miami offered me, and we knew this was happening. And those collectives the night before, the call went out to Buckeye Nation. We need some money to finish off this class. Millions rolled in from Buckeye Nation
Hmm.
to finish off that class. I don't think there are too many fan bases, Zach, that would do that. So NIL collective, yes, but the fan base should pat themselves on the back a little bit here. We stepped up and put our money where our mouth is. That's
Yep.
how bad we want to win a national championship. That's how bad we want to beat Michigan. We're willing to put the Benjamins behind the talk here. So why does it feel like Ohio State fans are maybe a little bit more talkative this offseason despite having lost three? It's because the fan base feels like they have a part of this team
Yeah.
because of NIL.
Yeah. Well, and I think the players that they got, right? So they got Jeremiah Smith and Edric Houston, who are
Yep.
huge 5-star that like both will contribute. I certainly Jeremiah Smith. I'm not as sure about Houston, but I would imagine he will at least be in the rotation. And then of course Caleb Downs and Will Howard in the transfer portal were two of the big names. Quinshawn
Sean
Judkins,
Judkins.
another who surprisingly was the Ohio State player represented on the NCAA 25 cover, which apparently was a former
Trust me, Travion Henderson could care less.
Yeah, yeah.
Trust me.
It's odd. I've heard the reality that one of the main engineers was a Michigan guy, and there are a lot of Easter eggs for Ohio State and the hatred of Ohio State in the trailer apparently. So thought that was interesting. But I digress. High profile transfers, big time recruiting class, including I think as great as Jeremiah Smith is going to be. Like I think getting Edric Houston, especially after losing Justin Scott, was probably one of the biggest wins because it was on the defensive side of the ball and they needed defensive line help.
I agree. Larry Johnson just, I mean, out of left field, right? Like who's this old guy coming up and pinch hitting here? Oh, bam! He just hit another home run, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then he gets up and only the most humble brag possible basically says, I don't know why everybody's negatively recruiting me. I ain't going nowhere.
Hmm.
Like I feel good. I still look young, like I that kind of stuff is funny if you follow recruiting, but that has everything to do with Larry Johnson basically telling Edric Houston along with NIL, you got nothing to worry about. I'm going to be here, buddy.
Hmm. Very good stuff. Heck of a coach too.
Mm-hmm.
So momentum is high. Uh, I want to ask a question about Joel Klatt's assessment, but before I do that, we brought up Jeremiah Smith. Quick thought: who has more receiving yards and receiving touchdowns this year, Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Ibuka?
Ooh, I want to say, hopefully it's a Mecca.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, but we did a we did a interesting thing on our show. I don't know if you got to watch this, Zach, and this will take me a while to get where I'm going, but hang with me. I made a I spent a weekend. My wife, by the way, God bless her. Thank you for her patience. I spent a weekend nerding out, and I created an algorithm to try to figure out where Marvin Harrison Jr. fit in the all-time greatest Ohio State wide receiver list.
Mm,
Okay. And so this algorithm took into account your um, career statistics at Ohio State. It took into account your single greatest game. It took into account your best season. It took into account how popular you are. And that was really hard to figure out because it's like how do you look at popularity in the terms of some of the older guys who came way before social media,
mm-hmm.
okay? Um, it took into account your NFL career. It took into account where you got drafted as a compared to your peers in your draft class.
Yeah.
I threw all of this into a gigantic algorithm, okay? And it spit out some very interesting like numbers. So like for instance, I thought for sure Chris Carter would be number 1, right? He
Mm-hmm.
was number 3 on the list.
Really?
Yeah. Number 2 was Marvin Harrison Jr.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, my all-time favorite wide receiver, Olave, got 4th.
Okay.
Number 1 was David Boston.
Okay.
Now, everybody says Jeremiah Smith reminds them of David Boston,
Mm.
the top guy that the algorithm said is your greatest wide receiver in Ohio State history. And that supposedly is Jeremiah Smith, and he's more advanced than David Boston was as a freshman. Feel free to get excited about that. And by the way, credit to I believe it's Sean on one of the fans of our show calls him Optimus Prime. That's the nickname we have given Jeremiah Smith
Oh,
is Optimus Prime.
the spin-off of Megatron,
Yep,
Optimus Prime. I
you
like
got it.
it.
Yeah, that's what we're calling him on our show.
Oh, that's good. Does so Joel Klatt came out with his post-spring rankings. I talked with TJ about this. Nebraska's 22. And we were asking the question: is the preseason hype more justified? I'm going to ask very similarly. I know the last time you were on this show, we both agreed that Ohio State should not be number one. Joel has them number one. Have you changed your mind?
No, I still think they're number 2. I think that it's us in Georgia, right? I still think it's
Mm-hmm.
us in Georgia with the best rosters. Um, until we prove it on the field, I'm still going to have us at number 2. And I know that sounds like I'm kind of reneging on what I was talking about earlier, right? Because I'm like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we really the last time we played Georgia, we kind of got screwed. But I still believe that until Ryan Day shuts people up,
Mm-hmm.
I want to hang it over him. Like I want to use it as motivation. I can't help it. Like I don't know. Hey, Ryan Day, even Buckeye Nation thinks you're number 2. Come on, man. Like I just feel like the whole Ohio State versus the world, or it needs to be out there. Now, but
Yep.
I'll say this for Joe Klatt. He got an up close and personal view of a lot of programs this spring, including Ohio State and Michigan, because he was on the field for both. He actually was on the physically on the field watching these guys play, right?
Yep.
Um, and I'll say this: I know some people don't like Joe Klatt. I've always really liked Joe Klatt.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like even though he at times gets his marching orders from Fox, which means he's going to be kind of a little bit more positive to the Big Ten than he is the SEC. He's going to carry that water for the Big Ten a little bit more. Um, I do believe that Joe Klatt would be the first person to say it's not good enough.
Hmm.
And so him putting Ohio State at number 1, I think is his way of basically acknowledging what we're talking about right now with momentum.
Yeah. Yeah, and Joel Klatt, like I think he's certainly been uh, a very positive towards Ohio State, but there were games where he was ripping on Ohio State's offensive line. I remember the
Rightfully
Maryland game.
so.
Yeah,
Rightfully so, Zach. Like I was ripping on him.
yeah. Well, and I say that because I think a lot of people have felt like that Joel is biased, and I think everybody has a bias, right?
Sure.
I like you don't get, but I think Joel Klatt's become, if he's not the best color commentator in the game, he's certainly one of the top, and I think he has a very good pulse on the sport. I mean, he is not afraid to say that Bama and Georgia are good.
Joe Klatt has an advantage over Kirk Herbstreit.
Hmm.
His name's Gus Johnson.
Yep.
Herbstreit really is hamstrung by his partner. I'm
Yeah, Chris
sorry.
Fowler.
It,
Yeah.
it Chris Fowler is just sometimes unlistenable. Um, but that's just my to me, I never get into these debates. I try not to because they're all so subjective. It really depends on taste, right?
Yeah.
Like I know Buckeye fans who turn the volume off on TV and listen to Paul Keels.
Right.
I can't do that because the timing never matches. Like like Paul Keels is telling me what's going to happen in the future, and I'm like, come on, Paul, like the play hasn't happened yet, buddy. But I can't do that. But I know people who do
Yep.
because they just can't stand whoever's on TV. It's so subjective,
Yeah.
whatever floats your boat.
Yeah. We can all be objective though that Desmond Howard should be kicked off College Game Day.
That
So,
doesn't take any objectivity. That's just a fact. That's straight up criminal what that
oh,
man's allowed to get away with.
oh, we on the Big Ten huddle we were evaluating the top 20 media personalities, and I think they had Desmond on there, and they didn't have Charles Woodson, and I'm like, this taking my Ohio State glasses off. I'm like, how in the world do you have Desmond above Charles? I just, it was nuts.
Can we talk about Lee Corso for a second?
Sure,
Lee
sure.
Corso, love the man. He's done so much good for college football.
Mhm.
Can you stop with the elder abuse, ESPN?
Yeah.
It's sad at this point.
I
It's 3 years. It's been 3 or 4 years too long here, guys.
Yeah. Well, it's like he had a stroke several years ago, and he has never recovered. And
He doesn't know where he is half the time, Zach.
yeah, I feel bad for him, and like I love the tradition. Like I mean, I remember I used to tune into College Game Day. I mean, it was weekly tradition. I'm watching that, and then I'm watching football. And I mean, the show has become unwatchable. And it's not all because of Lee Corso. Most of it's because
No,
of
it's
Desmond.
not
But
football anymore. A
yeah,
lot of it's just political correctness now, and it's like
yeah,
I still love like the good feel good stories sometimes that they're able to do.
yeah,
Love those. That's the best part of game day for me.
yeah,
But if you're looking for a better like to get you prepared for what you're about to watch, I think Fox Big Noon Kickoff is far superior
yep,
to what they're
yeah,
doing over at ESPN. And I think Urban Meyer has found his niche if he would just stay in his lane.
yep,
Like if but the thing is I know Urban, he's so competitive, he's addicted to the W. That's what we say on the show. The problem with Urban Meyer is he's addicted to the W. And when he gets an L, it becomes toxic for that man. Like
yep.
he is toxic to be around which is why when he went to Jacksonville and he
Oof.
was going to basically be flirting with the L every single week. That man became a miserable human being. That was
Yep,
the worst possible decision he could make.
yep, yep. We're gonna go from one miserable decision to a miserable suggestion, but I'm gonna throw it out there anyway. Revenge tour for
Oh,
Ohio State.
don't put that on t-shirt, please.
I say that Ohio State plays Oregon and they play Michigan, and they might play one of them twice, maybe even 3 times, depending on
Yeah.
how things go.
That's my prediction is Ohio State and Oregon will become a massive rivalry this decade, and they will
Yeah.
play 3 times this year.
Yeah. So, like, that's on the table. They could end up playing Georgia and or Missouri in the playoffs because
Mhm.
both teams are gonna be good. Um, like, those are the 4 teams that have beaten Ohio State in the past 3 years. So, like, and we talked about added motivation, but is there a sense where, like, you get a chance to right a lot of wrongs this season? Is that maybe the biggest piece of momentum for particularly this class of 2024 that or class of 2021, recruiting class of 2021? Um, is that kind of the momentum or
Yes,
the
yes.
motivation?
Yes, it absolutely is. I think it was Denzel Burke said it best. Natty or bust. That's their that when you lay that out on the table this early and basically he admitted that the reason why all these seniors came back is they haven't beat that team up north and they haven't won a national championship, and that's what it's all about this year. That's a lot of pressure to put on yourself,
Mhm,
but when you're as good as this roster is that has been put together, I think it's justifiable. And I give them some credit for having the cojones to say that's what it's going to be this year. Natty or bust. So I wouldn't call it a revenge tour, but the motivating factor is righting some of those wrongs. Absolutely. It better be,
mhm.
I hope they weren't just coming back because their girlfriend hadn't graduated yet. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I hope it's more than that. Yeah, I I don't want to steal someone else's coined failed phrase. So um I won't call it a revenge tour, but I will say that there is definitely like ours is natty or bust. Like that's going on a t-shirt this year for us, by the way.
Yeah.
That's right now we have the Angry Ryan Day t-shirt for sale on the website. Everybody go over to the ohiopodcast.com, click on the merch link, buy yourself an Angry Ryan Day t-shirt. It's great. But the next one is natty or bust because that's where we're at this year, right?
Mm,
Um, now I'm typically, Zach, a guy who preaches enjoy the journey, right? Like
yep.
that's kind of to me what sports is all about. I look at it from a journalistic side of things. You know, as you start the season, you have these expectations, and there's going to be valleys, and there's going to be mountaintops, and there's going to be good times and bad times. And on your way to the final destination, make sure to stop and smell the roses, enjoy the journey while you're going there, right?
Mhm.
Because before you know it, you blink your eye and the season's over. But I'll be darned if we don't like if this team fails to reach any of its goals again, Zach, and we have another disappointing season to come full circle, who do you put the blame on?
Mm,
It has to be Ryan Day and this coaching staff.
yep.
This roster that they have assembled, I mean, to go back to Optimus Prime and things here, like this is the Avengers, man, that they've put together here.
Mhm.
You
Yep.
better win something good. Like that's because if you don't, then you're starting to question if not now, when.
Right. Yeah.
And now we're back. We're living in the '90s all over again, Zach. Like I don't know your age. I know you're younger than me. The '90s as a Buckeye fan were not fun.
Oh, yeah. No, that's the 90s. So in 93, I was 7, and I think it was the first disappointing, like, loss that I
your,
could
your
grasp.
little 7-year-old heart's like, "Go Bucks!" Oh no!
Yeah, and I wanted to quit. I wanted to quit the rivalry until Jim Tressel came. Like, that's which I think and I had talked about this in a previous episode, but, like, people don't understand, particularly when Ohio State was going through, whipping the team up north every week, every year. People are like, "Oh, you shouldn't worry about them." I'm like, "You don't understand." My childhood was Ohio State being the best team in the country and then losing because of stupid shenanigans. And like, I mean, you have the Heisman winner in Eddie George, and he gets outrushed by some guy named Biaka Batuka, who is really good in his own right, but it's like he had 313 yards or something like that. And you're like, we have the Heisman winner. This is not supposed
Yeah.
to happen. And then Sean Springs slips and all that nonsense. And you're like, so yes, this
My
feels has
uh,
felt eerily.
my tweet, Zach, after the last November's loss was, to all you young Buckeye fans, this is what the '90s felt like.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, this was it. And so these things with you know with that team up north, they come in waves. Usually for about a decade, one dominates the other one. Um, so the question is when can this current wave, when can we switch the momentum again? Will it be this year? Um, I'm telling you, Zach, this is the type of roster that Cooper had in the '90s.
Yep.
People don't realize how good he could recruit. Like
Yep.
they didn't start ranking recruiting until the mid like 2000s, like 2005, 2006. Then they started to get into ranking. You go back and look at some of those rosters that Cooper had. He would have had the number one recruiting class multiple times.
Yep.
The rosters were phenomenal, and
Mhm.
somehow he would screw the pooch in that last game against the team up north.
Yep.
So so excuse me if I have a little bit of anxiety about how this season might end here, okay?
Yep.
I've
Yep.
lived through that and I'm going to continue to feel that way.
Yep. Well, with that being said, I'll ask this, and then I want to get your take on a food question here.
Okay.
But let me just ask this first: how do you see the season playing out for Ohio State? I know we're in May, but
I think that there's going to be a ton of expectations early. I think Ohio State's going to answer those for the most part. I think there's one game that scares me and it's in Eugene, Oregon. I
mhm,
think that there is a world or a possibility that exists where we go there, we're not ready. That crowd is ferocious. It will be the biggest game ever in Eugene, Oregon history
mm,
for that fan base. Um, they're they've got that circled, highlighted. You named it. If
it w-
we do happen to fall in that game, I think we then play them again in the Big Ten championship, which will be in Indianapolis on a fast track, which is basically Columbus 2.0 for us.
mhm.
And I think we take that game. I'm looking at 11-1, 12-1 Big Ten champions, getting the bye, and then probably playing Oregon again in the quarterfinals to
Mm,
to see who go up against Georgia.
mm.
Kind of in my head how I see the season playing out. And I'll be honest with you, this is really going to piss off a lot of fans who like the maize and blue. I see 3 or 4 losses on their schedule.
It's not an easy schedule.
It's not. And I just don't think you lose Jim Harbaugh and half your coaching staff and think you're just going to keep marching on. I
Yep.
just don't see that happening. They lost a lot of senior leadership. Now they've got a handful of really good players that are still there,
Yeah.
but they have zero depth, Zach. And and remember what happened in 2015 to Ohio State? They won the Natty in
Mhm.
2014. The next year, kind of the attitude changed, and yeah,
Yep.
they weren't as hungry.
Yep.
I've seen a lot of vat packing, patting each other on the back, a lot of, yay, we did it. And, you know, I just feel like they are going to be in for, because I tell you right now, Texas is going to come in hungry,
Yep.
hungry.
Yeah.
Oregon ain't going to be afraid of you. Oregon's not afraid of USC, not going to be afraid of you. And by
Yep.
the way, I think you got some coin flip games that you don't think are coin flip games. I think that Illinois is a solid football team. Had you on the ropes 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Should have beat you 2 years ago. They haven't forgotten that game.
Mhm.
Minnesota, don't sleep on Minnesota, okay?
Yeah.
Michigan State looking a whole lot better. Now they'll laugh at that, but yeah, we were laughing until you beat us too a couple years ago.
Yep.
Like there's some serious coin flip games on that roster, and if they lose momentum or they suffer a key injury or two, I'm thinking that they might end up with 3 or 4 losses on the year.
Yeah, I it's interesting because they have higher level talent. You know, they've got Will Johnson, Donovan Edwards, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. Like they are at least. I mean, Mason Graham is a surefire first rounder. Will Johnson, surefire first rounder. The depth is what I'm concerned about, especially with the defensive back that went down and Keon Sabb transferring. It's going to be interesting to track the boys in maize and blue because I think they have a lot of high level talent,
Yeah,
but with all the transition, how do they manage it? And I agree that there could be some slippage
if the
there.
culture is as good as they all claim it to be, then I think they've got a shot to be there to have something to say at the end of the year.
Hmm.
But if it's not, and things don't go their way early, it could spell trouble up there
Yep.
quickly.
And the quarterback room is a concern. Like that's a big question mark right now.
I watched that spring game and I was a little like I didn't expect that. Like I thought Orgy was going to be much better than what he showed.
Hmm.
Nah, he's an incredible athlete, and you can still win with that. JT Barrett, anybody? Like
Yeah.
uh, but you're gonna have to throw the ball in today's college football.
Yep.
You have to,
Yeah.
and give JJ McCarthy some credit. When he had to, he hit some big throws against Alabama.
Yes. Yep. And against Washington.
Yeah,
Like yep. So it sounds like Big Ten title for Ohio State, playing Oregon several times, maybe getting to the national championship game. Um, if Georgia, let me ask this: if Georgia and Ohio State played at the end of the season, what I won't ask you for a definite winner, but percentages, where would you put that game?
I think it's a 50-50 coin flip, and there's a lot of things that go into that, like how healthy are the teams,
Yep.
you know, who's got the most momentum going into the game, like um, which offensive line is playing better. Like I am cautiously optimistic that the offensive line is going to be really good this year.
Yeah.
Like
I think
cautiously
McLaughlin.
optimistic.
Yeah. I think McLaughlin. I think the heat is on Fry too. Like I think there's
Well, there's
positive
something
heat on him.
you've heard this, Zach. I know you've heard this. Chip Kelly's scheme is very offensive line friendly. How he manages to defenders are guessing because he
Hmm.
does a lot of pre-snap sugar, like
Yeah.
a lot of movement and things, and the offensive line can really fire off the ball on the running plays, and he loves athletic guards who can pull. And this scheme, I think, is very offensive friendly to an
Yeah.
offensive lineman,
Yeah.
which is something that I have been so concerned about under Ryan Day, because Ryan Day, he's a quarterback. What do all quarterbacks love to do, Zach? Throw the football.
Hmm.
So Ohio State's been really good at, for the most part, other than against Missouri, at pass blocking. But what have we been terrible at?
Run
Run
blocking.
blocking. Run blocking. And it makes sense because Ryan Day does. I don't think Ryan Day emphasizes it. I've been to several practices.
Mm.
You know how much they practice run blocking? Maybe 25% of the time. It's
Wow.
all pass blocking, 7-on-7, baby. Get them linemen in there, and they're all just pass blocking. And it's like that's why they're pretty good, picking up blitzes for the most part, and do it. But watch Ohio State; they just do not fire off the ball on the offensive line. I don't think they work on it enough, and I think that stems back to a lack of aggression when it comes to running the football. I think Ryan Day's pretty aggressive in the passing game,
Hmm.
but I think there was a move that happened a couple years ago that really hurt Ohio State, and that was losing Wilson to Tulsa.
Hmm.
That guy
Yeah.
was Ryan Day's eyes in the sky, someone who he trusted to tell him what's going on with the defense as a play caller. And when he lost that, I think Ohio State really took a step back. Ryan
Yep.
Day took a step back as a play caller.
Hmm.
Well, getting Chip Kelly up there, someone who he trusts, and taking that away from that aspect away from Ryan, to me is the story of the offseason, more so than all the players we got from the portal, all the players who decided to come back, and all the players we got as recruits. Getting Chip Kelly might have been the biggest chip, excuse my pun, that we got this offseason. So speaking of food, let's talk chips.
Yeah, there we go. Well, so I was very intrigued because I had heard this is going back to last week in the Common Man podcast, no, Common Fan podcast, sorry. Um, TJ was talking about Nebraska delicacies. I had to ask him about runzas because that's like a Nebraska thing.
Yeah.
And then he was telling me about cinnamon rolls with chili.
Oh my, the Texas A&M thing?
Well, apparently it's a Nebraska thing.
Oh, that's a Nebraska thing.
Yeah.
That sounds disgusting.
He swore by it. And actually, I have a friend who loves different international cuisines, and he's like, I could see like a little bit of cinnamon and chili, and it works. But he said it's like popular all in Nebraska, which got me thinking. I have a particular love for a particular Ohio product, but I was curious, Eric, could you give the listeners like some exclusive to Ohio foods that if they ever come to Columbus for a game, what should they get? What should they eat?
Yeah. So, excuse me. So, obviously, Columbus is known as Flavor Town. In fact, they almost changed the name of Columbus to Flavor Town. Did you know that?
Did they really?
Yeah. So back during the whole "we're gonna boycott Columbus, sailed the ocean blue in 1492" stuff,
Uh,
they're like, "Ah, what should we name Columbus?" And so Guy Fieri, who's from Columbus, Ohio, people were like, "Let's call it Flavor Town." It was a terrible idea, but um, two things. Two things. So, Columbus has got a very strong German heritage. So if you go back to like when people started to migrate to the United States, a lot of German people settled in Columbus, Ohio, and so
mm,
we have what's called German Village. So Schmitz is a fantastic little German restaurant that sells like sausages and Bahama Mamas and things of that nature. A a sausage from Schmitz is like nothing else in the world you're going to taste. That's
mm,
the most authentic German thing I've ever had here in Central Ohio. I love that. Um, so and they have a great food truck. Schmitz has got a great food truck too. So if you ever see it, if you're in Ohio and you ever see the Schmitz truck, pull over. It's worth to go get yourself an Italian sausage, a German sausage, whatever. Get you some Schmitz. Now, obviously, what Columbus is famous for, though, is the Columbus style pizza. You've got New York style. Everybody knows what New York style is. You got Chicago style. Everybody knows what that is. Columbus style is a circular, thin crust pizza that is usually cut in squares that has cornmeal, a dusting of cornmeal on the bottom of the crust, and all the toppings go to the edge of the pizza. So there's not really a crust to hold on to like a traditional pizza you would get from, name brand here, right? So that's what Columbus style pizza is. And of course, the most famous of those would be Donato's pizza. Um, Now, my personal favorite is Ron's Pizza from my hometown of Mount Vernon, Ohio. There's nothing like
Oh,
it. Uh, Shout out to Ron's Pizza. If anybody listens to Zach Guggenheim from the Knox County area, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I think Ron's Pizza has won pizza of the for the Mount Vernon News since like I was a kid in the 80s.
hmm.
It's family owned. I think they're on their third generation, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
And it's like nothing like it, they blow Donato's away. But that's one of those niches in a small town that is not even close to what most people are going to see when they go to a game. But Donato's and Massey's are all over Columbus, Ohio, and those are
Yeah.
Columbus style pizzas. Pizza Cottage, another one that's all over Central Ohio, another Columbus style pizza, thin crust, toppings to the edge, cut in squares. That's Columbus pizza. If you've never been to Columbus, you need to try. It's very unique. Um,
Yep.
it's good.
Whenever I go to back to Ohio, I always stop at Massey's and I bring back like 3 or 4 pepperoni pizzas, like half baked, and then I'll freeze them, and then for other games, I'll pop them in the oven,
That's a great
and then
idea. Yes.
and I'm already critical of Pennsylvania pizza. One, because I grew up in New Jersey, so there are very few places that do the New York style pizza well here in PA. But then also I just have a deep love for Massey's and even Donato's. I mean, Massey's I think to me is better, but there's just something about the combination of the toppings and the flavors. Oh man, it's so good.
Yeah.
So
The thing that's the thing you gotta be careful of is you can eat one person could sit down and eat a large Columbus style pizza, no problem, because
oh
it's
I
not
I've guilty.
it's
Guilty.
not thick. It's not a thick crust. And so before you realize that you've absolutely downed an entire large on your own and you're like,
Yeah.
whoa, what happened here? So yeah, whereas a Chicago style pizza, you have one slice of that pie and you're like, dude,
Mhm.
I'm rolling out of here, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a completely different world. My personal favorite is New York style pizza, where cut, bend it in half and eat it like a sandwich off a plate, right? You
Yep.
get one slice, right? And to me, New York style pizza is I can go and buy one slice.
Yep.
That to me, that's New York style pizza. That ain't happening in Columbus style pizza, man. One slice, you're gonna be like, well, that was a good bite. Can I have another one, please?
Yep. Yep. Oh yeah, it's the good version of Totino's pizza rolls in some ways. Like it's like you just pop them in and you know.
There you
Now,
go.
last question I'll get you out here on is corner piece or middle? What do you
Oh,
prefer?
middle.
Middle. Okay.
Oh, here's one for you. Best, the best bite. Do you eat it first or do you save it for the last?
Oh, it depends on the last time I had it. Because if it's been a while, I want the best bite first.
Oh, see, I'm opposite.
But if I've had it for a while, then I'm like I typically am best bite last. But if it's been a while, I want the best thing as soon as possible.
So when you have this conversation with Wisconsin people, ask them, write this down.
Okay,
Ask
I'm writing
them,
it down.
ask them about their views on frozen pizzas.
Mm.
I did not know this, but apparently Wisconsin folk, based off the Wisconsin person I've talked to in the past, consider themselves frozen pizza connoisseurs. And
Oh, oh.
it is a hotly debated topic in Wisconsin on who has the best frozen pizza.
I I have the next like 2 or 3 episodes marked out, and Wisconsin has just jumped to the next spot after that. Because I want to have forget football. We're not talking about football that episode. We're talking about frozen pizza for an
Well,
hour.
it makes sense because if you think about with the weather in Wisconsin in wintertime,
Mm,
you got to stock up on some stuff. Like 'cause
yeah.
you're not going out in the wintertime as much. in Wisconsin as you are here in Ohio or some of the other states here in the Midwest that have winters, but not nearly as bad as what they have in Wisconsin. So I was thinking
Right.
about that. I go, it makes sense. But the guy I talked to from Wisconsin when we had this conversation was like, they don't have a section of the grocery store that has frozen pizzas. They have aisles of frozen pizza in
Oh,
their grocery stores.
that's fun.
Yeah.
That's fun. Let me uh let me get you out of here, Eric. Again, remind everyone where we can find you.
TheOhioPodcast.com. Go over to the OhioPodcast.com, read articles. All our links are there. You can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube at theohiopodcast.com. Over on YouTube, we do 2 weekly shows, Zach. We do a Sunday evening roundtable discussion, which you've been a part of before,
Mhm.
where we have very similar topics that you brought up, and we just kind of hash them out with whoever's there. We try to bring on a guest or two during the off season, about a couple times a month for those shows. And then we started this off season a call-in show on Thursday nights, which has been wild. So that is the listener's chance to get on and talk smack with us, talk football, tell us how great we are, tell us how wrong we are. It is wild, and that has really taken off. Thursday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern, and then Sunday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, the call-in show is fun. I had a lot of fun. The I think it was the first time you guys did it, and you guys worked out the kinks fairly quickly, and then it was like smooth sailing. Is really fun. So,
Everything was good till this past Thursday, and some troll called in
oh no,
and said there was gremlins under the benches, and we were like, "What is this guy talking?" And then later in the show, my soundboard went haywire. Yeah, I was like, "This is some strange voodoo stuff going on." So
spiritual
hopefully,
warfare. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, what the heck?
hopefully we've worked it out. I mean, we've
Oh
done well here. So,
yeah.
but yeah, that was wild. But
Oof.
looking forward to doing that. Our plan, Zach, is to do these call-in shows after games. So we'll be live after football games for you to call in and
Ooh.
give your 2 cents on what Ryan Day did or did not do.
I I I know I'll be calling in, especially if it's a loss at some point. Be like, fire Ryan Day. No, I won't do that. I won't do
We'll
that.
do. We plan on doing it on the majority of games. Now we do go to one away game a year
Mm,
as a podcast for fun. I think this year we were planning on going to Michigan State.
mm.
However, some of our fans are trying to tell me it needs to be Northwestern because they're playing at Wrigley
At
Field.
Wrigley.
And I can't get behind number 1 traveling to Chicago and number 2 watching a football game in a baseball stadium. However, if that's the one we end up doing, so be it. But it was going to be, I think, and I'm still leaning this way, going to Michigan State.
Yeah, that'll be a good game.
So,
That'll be a good
and
game.
then my wife and I always go to one game, but that doesn't mean Chris can't do the call-in show. Or if it's early in the day, we don't have the call-in show till later in the evening. But this year, I think I'm going to try to do Marshall.
Oh,
Yeah,
that'd be good.
we
I
have
that
and
that
on
might be a contender for I'm either I'll probably try to take my son to a game, and that might be
that
one
might
of
be
my
the one, huh?
sons. That might be the one. So if that's the case, I'll let you know.
Yeah. So on the College Huddle, one of the first podcast that joined us was the Thundercast, which is a Marshall podcast.
No
They are
kidding.
they are fantastic. Awesome guys. They are killing it over there. And check them out. If you know anybody from West Virginia or is a Marshall fan, or if you just want to learn more about them heading into the game, trust me, we'll have them on the show. Those guys are fantastic. Thundercast, they do great stuff. Great work.
That's fun. Yeah, so check out the College Huddle
Yeah,
as in general, and obviously OhioPodcast.com. For us, just a programming note, the next 3 weeks, it's looking like we're going to hit Minnesota. So
Sky U Pod.
Sky U Pod's coming
Them
on.
boys are awesome.
So, and I think it's for Minnesota fans in particular, they're happy because I had Iowa and Nebraska, and they're like, we're sick of you pumping up Iowa and Nebraska. Minnesota, you're going to get your due. And then Russ from the Boiler Express is coming on, so we're going to get some Purdue coverage in 2 weeks. And then Bruin Source, our first of the Pac-12 editions, is going to come on in 3 weeks. So, and then I'm gonna fight to get Wisconsin on because I want to have that frozen pizza discussion. But again, find us on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube. Again, this past week was the highest boost I've ever had on YouTube. So let's get that up. So like and subscribe. Again, this is the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Eric, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to having you again in the near future. For the rest of you, take care. God bless.